All right, let's try this again. Let's try this again. ETM Hotel Rennie Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into this evening show. I was live earlier, however, I deleted the video because of a technical difficulty. So I'm gonna elaborate on that slight bill, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the presentation in full of what I did on Unk Show regarding research methodology and the scientific method and so forth. And then we'll get into the literature review for a second time. So yeah, like the show, share the show, tell a friend, tell a friend. Um, a bit foodie. Uh, we live and let me save the description. Always check the description, yo. Um, Make sure you guys are supporting the conscious community first Pan African Journal. We are a part of we are that part of the conscious community that actually produces, whether it's literature, as far as works, community works, and so forth. We kind of hang our hat on following our ancestors. And they were more than just lecturers, talkers, they were doers. They were achieving and they set a high standard of bar. So let me know if I'm a little low. If you can hear me all right, then cool. All right. And I see we got a couple of people in here. What up, O? What up, Juju? Again, man, like the show, share the show, tell a friend, man. You know what I'm saying? Let's get it in. One second, and we'll get it cracking because I don't want to be too long. I ain't gonna be long-winded on this. So I'm gonna hit my points and get it going. All right. Trying to see if somebody will join. I did send a link. What's this email? All right, I see we got some folk up in here. So let's try to do it again, y'all. Hold on just a second. All right, that's right. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We get to it. This time we're gonna do it without any interruption. And for people who saw this before, just give me some time because the part two is what's actually necessary. But I wanted to combine this information in one so that we could deal with it. LB said the 49ers on, he'd be right back. Yeah, the 49ers gonna win. All right. So basic understanding of the scientific method, fallacies, and research designs. Following this, we'll have the literature review. discuss a book in reference, and then we'll deal with it again. Try to stick to it. All right, to gain an understanding of something conceptual as a concept requires that one first grasp it mentally, to get a hold of it and then study it over the course of its development. Our methods grasp a whole in motion, like a movie as opposed to still photography, then uncovers the internal, opposite elements within, and finally examines the course of its development through its life process, a process resulting from a unity and struggle of opposites that constitute the moving principle of its development. What we will discuss in this particular presentation today will evolve around my hypothesis, defining the scientific method, research diagrams or methods, don'ts in research, fallacies, appealing to authority and convenience, conclusion, and then we will transcend into the literature review again. So what is the scientific method? What is research? Why is it important to use methods? What are fallacies and why is it important to know how to recognize them? And what are some don'ts in using methodology? In our discovery for knowledge and quest for truth, the path one takes to gain answers must result in verifiable and testable data collected over time based on unbiased research. The roadmap to answering questions one may be curious of has always existed since the earliest modern humans walked the earth. Methods had to be developed in order to consistently repeat results that answer questions. Through trial and error, modern humans began to perfect their craft. It is in this moment the use of proper methodology became essential. From building huts, preparing food, protecting themselves from predators, adapting totally to their natural world, etc., created the initiative to create methods to solve problems. Today, the internet has handicapped most minds from adhering to the scientific method or any scholastic method, and often causes one to argue from a faulty premise or be fallacious in regurgitating information online based on someone else's research and not their own. If we are to solve problems, we are going to have to remain scientific in our approach by following the correct method. So let's define the scientific method. The scientific method, mathematical and experimental technique employed in the sciences. More specifically, it is the technique used in the construction and testing of scientific hypotheses. The process of observing, asking questions, and seeking answers through the tests and experiments is not unique to any one field of science. In fact, the scientific method is applied broadly in science across many different fields. The scientific method has 5 basic steps. In some instances, you may see 7 or 8. Depends on who's actually teaching the course and what they are elaborating on after 5 steps. Plus 1 feedback step, make an observation, ask a question, form a hypothesis, or a testable explanation, make a prediction based on hypothesis, test the prediction, iterate, use the results to make new hypotheses or predictions. All right, let's define what research is. Research is any intellectual investigative process by which information is systemically and vigilantly gathered for the purpose of answering questions, examining ideas, or testing hypotheses and theories. Here's a model of what a method looks like. The scientific method, to be precise. You ask questions, you do background research, construct your hypothesis, experimental data becomes research for new or future project, ask new questions, form new hypothesis, experiment again. If the results rely partially or not at all with hypothesis. I kind of skipped and went to that phase, but after construct the hypothesis, you test with an experiment. Did your procedure work? If your procedure worked, then you analyze the data and draw conclusions. Results align with hypothesis, yes. If not, then you're going to have to redo your method. If they do align, then you want to communicate your results. in your procedural workings, you do want to troubleshoot to make sure that you're there. So if this is just a literature review or something along those lines, you want to make sure that you have all the data. Now, in order to test that data, you're going to need some sense of a source. Is it a primary or a secondary or tertiary source? Where is this coming from? Can we actually get to a secondary, which will lead us back to a primary source to validate? That's why a lot of people go hunting for primaries or trying to vet sources so that they can actually, in that procedural stage, they actually know exactly when that data comes out that they are legitimately functioning well in that phase. Scientific evidence is the material world reflected by the human brain and translated into symbolic forms of thought. The untrained often worship cult-like the quoted ideas of others, but never cultivate their own. Exact data, order of evidence, chronology, historical context, and local summation. Deduction, induction, analysis, synthesis, observation, comparison, contrast, experimentation, and evaluation are primary elementary requisites for our research. Now, the research design basically answers the questions: how to proceed, what to use, when to use it, where to use it, and who is to be included. Every science makes use of certain general concepts. We see the following concepts as essential elements of describing the elementary and integrated process of wedding research methods with statistical analysis. Choosing the primary research method. This is just a model for a method. You can pause the video and kind of go through the phases. But a standard model is one that I used earlier, which many people seem to adopt in their process of presenting information for those of you who have a method. This is a research design. The research designs come in many different techniques. Here are a few examples. You can have a focus group as a research design, an experimental research where you're collecting data to test results through an experiment. Documentary research process. Many people seem to think that Hidden Colors is a documentary research process. However, it is not. Survey research. You could do a survey where you can go into a mall or something like that, and you can have these questionnaires for a particular group of people that you'll probably spend all day trying to get results from. Policy research. You can test to see if a certain policy would be effective in a particular community. Like those, what is that people do? Neighborhood watch, so on and so forth. Content analysis research. Okay. You have field research, which a lot of people tend to lean on the research of others who are experts in the field or adhere to those who have the ability or the funds to go and do some of this research and bring that information back, i.e. Kemet on Trial, where Brother Polite flew to Kemet, gathered some research that he needed to prepare for the debate. And in that discussion, that information was verified and used in the Kemet on Trial conversation or debate. And it stood out from a lot of the other information that was presented by the people who were arguing against Kemet. You have action research, speaks for itself, action. Case research, historical research, and ethnography. A lot of us do historical research. Most of the presentations that you see on the Mossi Warrior Clan channel are in the liking of historical research. You may see some action research. You may also see field research, and we should have compiled enough field research to do documentary research. But hopefully one day in the future, we'll be able to put out a Mossi project that the community would enjoy. Right now, we took a big step with Brother Ben helping put forth the journal, and you can find that in the description. No scientific or theoretical problem or challenging empirical question can be solved without the use of a definite method. Methods are the backbone of research designs. Achieve this by, gathering single facts and accumulating primary data for the purpose of answering selected research questions based on a certain theoretical view. Direct observation, questionnaire instruments, and analysis of document and experimental inquiry gather facts. So how does one research this? What is one's method? The task is to mirror the movement of the object of study in the process of research. How is it born? How does it develop? Can it be replicated? How does it function? How does it mature? When does it enter in decline? How does it decay? When did it die? Or when it dies? When did it decompose? And then passes away by transforming itself into something else. The goal of scientific research, therefore, is to provide an exhaustive knowledge of the world truth. Truth is knowledge that accurately corresponds to objective reality. Delusions is knowledge that does not correspond to reality. There is a content of knowledge that does not depend on human beings, for it is determined by the external world, which exists independently of one's ability to measure. No scientific or theoretical problem can be consciously solved without the use of a definite method. The substance of method largely depends on the nature of the objects or phenomena being considered. Methods, the backbone of research designs, achieve this by gathering single facts and accumulating primary data for the purpose of answering selected research questions based on a certain theoretical worldview. Direct observations, questionnaire instruments, and analysis of document or experimental inquiry gather facts. For any research design, the primary objective is to assure that the facts are investigated as accurately as possible and that those they actually form, each with regard to the other, different moments of evolutionary process. Now, the historical cast of mind peculiar to man, regardless of his origins, works through historical criticism, which is essentially a technique for processing documents. Even so, sources first have to be established. Remember, this is an actual key point in a historical argument or historical research or presentation or design. Now, here's some don'ts in research methodology. Quoting authorities, prophets, scholars, and other musty excursions into name dropping as to lend credibility in and of itself is not evidence. This is often used in arguments that you see online, whether it be via YouTube or Facebook, or probably Twitter. I don't know. I don't have a Twitter account or whatever other social media device y'all use these days. I just really have Facebook. That's it. That's all I'm restricted to. Fictions and myths are not empirical facts. Superstitions is not science or evidence. So this God that's supposedly going to send 200,000 or how many ever people to crack the sky to save the rest of the world or a certain specific number of people, that's not considered science or evidence. Merely clipping, comparing, and commenting on quotes is not scholarship. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say that I'm reading an actual article and I am quoting from that particular article, and then I just give a comment on what was just said in this paragraph, i.e., the sky is blue. And then I turn around and say the sky is blue because it's reflecting, the water's reflecting from up in the air, whatever. I'd say crazy if I just give some analogy behind it. Okay, that is not scholarship. That's just your opinion based on what you just read or your reading comprehension at that point. All right, it's not research. Now, finding prominent personages in print that agree with you is not research, meaning that you're unwilling to read the other side of the argument, i.e., one that I like to talk about a lot is that I really don't go and try to beat up the Bible because I don't want to read the scriptures. I hate it. I have read some scriptures. I have looked in the Bible, but I am not a Bible scholar. I don't think that even exists in the world. I don't see that book as I don't like it. Okay. But sometimes I know that I have to do things that I do not like. So I had to go out and I had to purchase a bunch of books written by Muslims. I don't like the Arabic sources, but I had to go by the Arabic sources. The reason that I had to buy the Arabic sources is because when you're speaking of West African history and culture, at some point it is heavily influenced by the Arabs, their writings, things of that nature, infused. Okay, I would rather do that than read the Bible. The goal of proper methodology. The goal, therefore, of scientific research project is full correspondence of knowledge to reality and exhaustive knowledge of the specific object under study, separating and synthesizing the elements, tendencies, connections, and processes as to arrive at a resolution to one's initial problem. All right, let's transcend into understanding fallacies. Appeal to convenience is accepting an argument because its conclusion is convenient, not necessarily true. This fallacy is not common enough. This falls under appeal to consequences, which is very similar, except that consequences could be positive or negative, and convenience is only positive. The other one is appeal to authority, is a common type of fallacy or an argument based on unsound logic. When writers or speakers use appeal to authority, they are claiming that something must be true because it is believed by someone who's said to be an authority on the subject. Whether the person is actually an authority or not, the logic is unsound. Instead of presenting actual evidence, the argument just relies on the credibility of the authority. Now, an example of that is when one person argues that academia, I don't like using that word because it puts me in the mind frame of the brother who constantly says it. But he constantly, when someone says that academia says this, who's academia? Can we be a little bit more specific? And then you hear things like, well, this person is an authority on the said subject. Okay. Now, when you're dealing with the second one or the first one, this is a true statement made by the brother Asar Motel. He said, in science, we do not care who's the authority. We only concerned with the method. Now, if you can't demonstrate one's method, or if you can't stand on your or defend your source, then your source will die. It's just that simple. Remember, people always die at their source. If you're unable to defend your source, then that information is irrelevant, and you would have to concede. Scientifically, you would have to concede if you adhere to science. If you're a believer, then you're just going to continue to believe in whatever somebody says. The name dropping of expert scholar for the sake of their name is useless to science. It is time constrained, dated, external to the specific object as it is dissected, then synthesized, and ends up being name dropping of famous folk to win arguments, as opposed to answer research questions directly. To do so, one must go straight to direct data, collect direct evidence, and then deduce inferences from a particular method used to analyze or synthesize those data. Then draw inferences and conclusions. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on that because that would basically be doing what I just said earlier, just giving commentary at the end of that. But to give you a better example of that in layman's term, when you name drop someone, it's, Obanga said, or Sheikh Antijop said. When we dealt with the meaning of the place name Kemet, in a conversation that ended up turning into a debate over time, we heard a lot of appealing to authority as the one side of the argument, often referred to the elders, as well as trying to defend the ancestors, premise from the perspective that they understood it to be Kemet, meaning black people or black land, whatever. right? Without doing the scientific method, they actually just adhered to a fallacy by, the appealing to authority fallacy or appealing to convenience, because it was just at that time it was convenient for them to just actually say that and thinking that it was cool. Now, it is important to recognize fallacies in order to properly understand the arguments being made. Logical fallacies are flaws in one's reasoning and also have effects on one's logic. This will also lead to credibility issues of the person who argues from a fallacious position. My conclusion: based on the relative data collected, it is imperative that we learn how to properly research and address certain topics scholastically. We must adhere to the rules of engagement when we address subject matter scientifically. We cannot profess to adhere to science and then break every rule related to its method. Also, having the ability to recognize fallacies when they are present allows us to immediately eliminate the premise of the arguer and dismiss any information related based on faulty logic or their inability to verify information. He said, she said is not scholarship and has no merit amongst the scientific mind. Assume responsibility for what you present and continue to evolve scientifically in your approach when it comes to solving problems or learning. Please, if you're paying attention to this presentation, slow down and screenshot this if you want to. It is in the description. Just give me a minute. Yolanda. Here are some more sources. A few of these links are actually images that were used in the presentations, but if you click on these links, they go in depth also about the scientific method and some steps. And we'll give you more clarity on those as well. I try to do the best to give you every angle here. But I do also want to go back to the books. I see that when I look down that somebody had mentioned the books. There go the books. There are 4 books by, I think I only used 3. University of Chemistry Press research methodology books, but they have a research design, they have a historical research book, and then they have SABA. They actually have more than that, as they have put out 2 more books related to, well, 1 more book related to research methods. I think that everybody should have all of those books that adhere to that. So this is part 1 of the actual conversation. I'm going to get into the other part, which is the literature review right now. Give me just a moment. Yeah, Jolanda, if you want to refresh your screen, the link for Killmonger's Corner is in there in the description. I just double checked it. If you came on the link earlier, it is not in the description, but however, if you refresh your screen, it is there. All right, so let me transcend into part 2 of the discussion. Earlier, I tried to do this, but then we ended up being rejected. So again, I'm gonna try to make this brief. This book is by A.B. Ellis. It's called History of the Gold Coast. I got this book again from the Concord College Library, kind of blacked out. I want to make it live here. History of the Gold Coast. Okay, there's the Gold Coast. It's the book. Seal right here. Moorhead, Minnesota. Yeah, they go to college right there. Embroidered in it. It's from it was in the college library. I purchased it. There's the table of contents. It's a few pages of that. Here's the last page of the table of contents. Right here. There's no introduction or outline for this book. Starts right there, chapter 1, A History of the Gold Coast. Straight like that. Turn to the back of the book. Library card, library date thing. Blank page. Last page of the book, page 400, it says the end at the bottom, right where my thumb is, it says the end. And then it says Charles Dickens and Evans, Crystal Palace Press. The end. There's no bibliography in this book, right? None. So I'm gonna do like I did before. And I'm just gonna, this is basically a literature review. So I'm gonna read like a paragraph or something like that. Then I'm gonna elaborate. So I'm gonna deal with chapter 1 right here. I think last time I went to like chapter 3. At the beginning, it says West Africa is known to the ancient voyages of the Phoenicians, the periplus of Hanno, extent of his voyage, expeditions of Exodus of Cyzicus, traces of Phoenicians on the Gold Coast. So it's basically an outline of what's going to be in chapter 1. Those few things that were actually mentioned. And in the first paragraph, it says, it is a well-authentic historical fact that frequent voyages were made from the Mediterranean along the western coast of Africa, both by the Phoenicians and the Egyptians, many hundreds of years before the Christian era. But considerable difference of opinion as to the extent of these voyages prevails, and it is not generally held that they were pushed as far south as the Gold Coast. There seems, however, fair ground for supposing that part of the Western Africa was not entirely unknown to the ancients, though it must be confessed the whole subject is involved in great obscurity. None of the writings of the Phoenicians, the greatest maritime people of antiquity, have been transmitted to us, but the numerous colonies which they established on the shores of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic beyond the Straits of the Gibraltar attest the extent of their earlier voyages. Some of these colonies were founded between 1200 and 800 BC, and it is morally certain that settlements would not be established at so great a distance from the parent state until the seas had been frequently explored and became fairly well known. The accounts of the Phoenicians' discoveries furnished by other nations are very meager, which may be accounted for by the fact that the Phoenicians, being jealous of foreigners participating in the advantages of their enterprises, were careful to keep them concealed. Everything related to their navigation was not only a trade, but also a state secret. And Strabo records several instances of their anxiety to prevent other nations prying into their affairs. Hence, most of these secrets perished with the downfall of the Phoenicians, and the conquest of Tyre by Alexander and that of Carthage by Rome was followed by a marked retrograde movement in the science of navigation. All right. This is where it gets tricky because we don't have a source for any of the information in this particular book, right? So in literature review, the first thing you want to do is, let me move this thing at the top, back down to the bottom. Y'all can't see that. Let me get off my face. The first thing in literature review that we want to actually do is we want to kind of deal with the evidence. So what can we prove? Or what can we verify? It said in the first paragraph, with the first lines, it is a well-authenticated historical fact that frequent voyages were made from the Mediterranean along the western coast of Africa, both by the Phoenicians and the Egyptians, many hundreds of years before the Christian era, but considerable difference of opinion as to the extent of these voyages prevails, and it is not generally held that they were pushed as far as south as the Gold Coast. So can we find an account of the Phoenicians in West Africa? Now, usually in literature review, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can gather a bunch of sources, right? And those sources would be other useful books, right? So in order for me to deal with any of this about Kemet and the Phoenicians, I would need literature in those two different fields. So is there any attestation that I can go upstairs and grab from any of my literature that's going to tell me that the Remich were in West Africa or traveling to West Africa via the Mediterranean? I know the answer to that question already, because when you're looking at the Remich and their writings, you don't hear about them writing talking about that there's, you know, going through the Mediterranean to come around the coast to West Africa. But you may hear about later on trades that would show some type of communications via the Sahara trade routes. So the Phoenicians on the west coast of Africa. There's an article here by the Cambridge. If we want to vet this, this is a good example of being able to vet this. Now, remember, the book that I just read, it has no sources. And even if it did have sources, it would be useful for me to be able to go in and vet that particular source, right? Because that would be huge for us to be able to gather that information and be like, okay, here's the source for that. All right, so it says, let's take a look here. I can't get the full citation because I don't have permission. So I'll try to go out and go elsewhere. But maybe this will lead me into something else that I can look up and try to verify. In the present state of our knowledge of the true extent of the Phoenician accomplishments in their homelands and in the Mediterranean, it may be seen foolhardily to try to evaluate their achievements in West Africa, or indeed anywhere else on the periphery of their sphere of influence. The attempt has, however, been made in past nearly always from the purely historical aspect. And my excuse for essaying it once again is that the time seems to have come to emphasize how archaeology could help to shed light on their colonial and mercantile activities in those regions. Now, before 1200 BC, the Phoenician cities on the Syrian coast had sent out colonies to Cyprus, Rhodes, and possibly Crete, and not much later, farther west to Utica and even Gades. If we are to believe our ancient sources, one, these colonies and others situated at the most strategical points in the Mediterranean were important vantage places from which to curb the Greek spread westward. They kept the Greeks from any real foothold west of a line drawn from Cumae to Salamis, apart from an enclave in the Gulf of Lions. So this wasn't too specific into what we're looking for, but this is a piece of a puzzle relating to trying to vet or verify basically the first few sentences of the book that I just read that has no sources in it. So I would, that didn't give me much. So let's deal with Hanno the Navigator. Because this is a navigator. And usually when you have navigators out there, you have chroniclers. And when you have chroniclers, you have primary documents, attested eyewitness accounts that can verify that this particular person is either a real person, if this voyage existed, and so on and so forth. Now, Hanno the Navigator was a Carthaginian explorer of the 6th or 5th century BC, best known for his naval explorations of the western coast of Africa. So he's from Carthage. I'm pretty sure this was a early BC guy, right? Because they're talking about Carthage. And if you're familiar with Unc Show last week, we pulled up the maps that would indicate a white influence Africa later on down the line. The only source of his voyage is Greek, Periplus. According to some modern analysis of his route, Hanno's expedition could have reached as far as south as Gabon. However, others have taken him no further than southern Morocco. Now, Periplus is a manuscript document that lists the ports and coastal landmarks in order and with approximate intervening distances that the captain of a vessel could expect to find along the shore. In that sense, the Periplus was a type of log. It served the same purpose as whatever else this thing says down here. All right. So like I told you, anytime you see navigators, you're going to have chroniclers that were involved in that because someone's documenting. Now, here's this expedition. It says Carthage dispatched Hanno at the end of a fleet of 60 ships to explore, colonize the northwestern coast of Africa. He sailed through the Straits of Gibraltar, founded or repopulated 7 colonies along the African coast of what is now Morocco, and explored significantly farther along the Atlantic coast of the continent. Hanno encountered various indigenous people on his journey and met with a variety of welcomes. Gorele, at the terms of Hanno's voyage, explored finding the island heavily populated with where it described a hirsute and savage people. So this is where he runs into so-called savage people. Attempts to capture the males failed, but 3 of the females were taken. So Hanno couldn't get the men; they were savages, but the women couldn't get away. These were so ferocious that they were killed. Now they killed the women, and their skins preserved for transport home to Carthage. So they killed the women, skinned them. Wow. The skins were kept in the temple of Juno tonight, or a start of Hanno's return, and according to Pliny the Elder, survived until the Roman destruction of Carthage in 146 BC, some 350 years after Hanno's expedition. The interpreters traveling with Hanno called the people Gorille, or in Greek texts. When the American physician and missionary Thomas Stoughton Savage and naturalist Jeffrey Wayman first described the gorillas in the 19th century, the apes were named Troglodytes or gorillae after the description of Hanno. So, all right, the gorillas. All right, got it. We ain't talking about people no more. They actually 3 female gorillas. I guess is what they're saying, not people. All right. I don't want to go too far into this particular article, but if we were to continue to read, then we would start trying to piece together this, which would get us off track because we're just trying to substantiate the Phoenicians and the Egyptians traveling to West Africa. So Hanno would be one of the people that would be familiar with travels at a time as early as the prophetic dates that we just mentioned. It's key because we would need to verify really wholeheartedly his voyage. So I'm really trying to get away from him, the sea and red men in Africa. Because if we looked at a map in the Mediterranean, it's you know, if you had a boat or anything like that in the Mediterranean, you actually can get around. There was a lot of trade and things in the Mediterranean that was actually taking place. But also you had a bunch of people that was up there like pirates that were wrecking shop. And you had people that, you had wars that was in the Mediterranean because people want to control those trade routes. So that communication pipeline, which was key. So there's a lot of mess going on up there. One that we probably would need to study further to kind of see what position we would have taken in that discussion. Are you mad? All right, so you have the sea and the red men in Africa in modern Ghana. I don't talk about that. It says 600 BC, Phoenicians sailed down the East African coast, and Carthage sent Hamilcar to West European coast, plus Hanno to West African coast. The periplus of Hanno equals voyage of Hanno, records, and so on and so forth. So maybe Hanno is a good place to start for us to verify any additional information regarding to the Phoenicians' involvement in West Africa. But as far as the Remish, I haven't seen any writing regarding the Remish traveling through the Mediterranean to get to West Africa. You know, there was trade routes along the Sahara that probably would have taken less time. I don't know, maybe Maybe, maybe not. I'm not going there. But the point is, I have a book, no bibliography. Even if it did have a bibliography, I would need to verify a bunch of information in this book before I can get on here and tell you that, hey man, this took place, this happened, right? I would have to go through scrutinizing this source by collecting additional data to verify what I presented to you. If I just merely came on here and I presented this information to you, it would be pseudo because I'm relying on one source. But if you come and you have a book about the Phoenicians and their writings and say, well, there's no documentary of any Phoenicians traveling or the remnants traveling to West Africa via the Mediterranean and coming around and ending up further south than a particular point, then I would have to concede that because your evidence would trump the evidence that I have. And this particular author, Ellis, did not provide any evidence of such. It's basically telling me that something happened and I can't verify it. Now, notice the names. He said the Phoenicians, which we know existed. He said the Egyptians, which we know existed. He said the Mediterranean, which we know is there. He also said the Gold Coast, which we know was named, and then he brought out Christian era. So we know it happened before the Christian era. These were key emphasis here. He even gives us a timeline. He says around the colonies were founded between 1200 and 800 BC. Some of the colonies that he was mentioning, he mentioned the Gibraltar, the Straits of Gibraltar, which is a key place because, you know, when you're dealing with trade, you got these places that people would travel and so on and so forth. However, how accepted is the hypothesis that Phoenician sailors, I don't even want to deal with this. This is a Reddit thing. When the geography of Africa tells a circumnavigation project, I ain't gonna get into any of that. I don't like those particular things. The story of Africa. So let's go up here and let's deal with this. Egyptian travels to West Africa through the Mediterranean. I'm spelling wrong. Mediterranean. Now, one thing that I like about Kemet is that when we want to find a reliable source related to them doing any traveling anywhere, usually we can find a papyrus or papyrus where they have written about their travels, or a stele talking about their travels. Because they document it so well that the remnants would not make a trip like that without talking to someone. And with the type of boats that they actually use, if they're coming through the Mediterranean and down, like, let me give you an example. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If they're coming through the Mediterranean here, remember now they're gonna come up here, then they're gonna get out here, right? But if they're gonna come up and get out here, there's a lot of trade and piracy going on here, as well as other activities that are unbeknown to us. So they're gonna instead of going here, but there's some trade routes and things of that nature. Look, trade routes. Here's West Africa, Niger, trade routes. Look at that, trade routes. Right in the Kemet. They're gonna skip all of this, travel through the Mediterranean, pass up these trade routes to come down here, come through to here, and then come around Morocco and come on down the coastline into West Africa. That's what they're gonna do. That's basically what he's saying right here. I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm saying based on the knowledge that I have, or that I'm not, the information that I actually have, I don't know about a travel to, somebody can correct me, I don't care. But I don't know about a travel on those boats that were made of papyrus reed from the Mediterranean out into the Atlantic, whether they hung close to land or not. I don't know about those boats surviving those cross current winds at that time. The archaeological evidence is just doesn't seem to support that, in my opinion. Um, Based on some of the things that I've studied about the shipping technology, um, which didn't advance until the late 14th, 15th century. Using the works of these early 20th century writers of West African history, the conquest of Egypt, the rule of the Mediterranean through that, did the ancient Egyptians migrate to ancient Nigeria? I don't like that source. I ain't gonna get into that. Early African civilizations, the ancient Egypt, Nubia, Swahili. I don't know about that one either. See, they keep saying the history of North Africa. And African empires under siege. The Nile, the longest river in the world, live science. Let's see. All right, let's see what this says. It came up twice. Oh, figures. Oops, can't get there. All right, so basically, in a nutshell, I got one book, no bibliography, no other information that I can verify in it. I can go online trying to search for information to vet this particular paragraph that I only read one paragraph. But in literature review, some things are substantial in order to get to the root of the problem. Now, I just did some light work. Like, I would read that. I probably would have read the whole chapter. And what I would do is I would start after I read the whole chapter, seeing if I can collect additional information from the first chapter that I read in this book. Because one, I want to verify the Phoenicians traveling to West Africa, because that is essential to the premise that would support some of the information that I read in the book. Second, I would have to get the Phoenicians. So then I either could rely on somebody that I know that has a lot of work on the Phoenicians. So I would contact that person and be like, hey, look, I need information regarding the Phoenicians traveling to West Africa. And if they say, huh, or question it or anything like that, then I'm gonna say, you don't have anything related to the Phoenicians traveling through the Mediterranean to get to West Africa. And be like, man, no. Or maybe they'll point me in the direction of somebody who may have that information. So then I would take that data that I would collect from them, and then I would verify it. I basically would do a literature review on that. And as I'm compiling this literature review just off of one chapter, then I can substantiate if I was to come out of this book and say anything to you about what actually happened. Okay, so in order for me to say we have evidence that there was the Phoenicians traveled the Mediterranean to get to West Africa via the Atlantic. And then I would show you their route. Now, could the Phoenicians cross the Sahara to get to West Africa and they stuck to these trade routes? That's a different argument. because they could have came through those trade routes down to West Africa from that way. And I would dig that, because it's a possibility. However, I can't substantiate the claim that is made in this particular book in the first paragraph. So then I'm telling you right now what I would do. I would look in the history of West Africa, and now I'm looking for a Phoenician influence. So I would need to find the Phoenician culture, Phoenician language, because when you're dealing with people, there's trade, and in trade, there's a language barrier. So some type of language or communication would have to be established where they can get on the same page via trade. So then I will have all of these particular questions, which this book will lead me to an actual research question that would actually need an answer, right? So when did the Phoenicians actually have some type of contact with West Africans? But I don't want to bore anybody, but I just wanted to redo it without the interruptions and the discrepancies within the channel like it did before. And kind of elaborate on those things. So I do want to say, man, thank you again for tuning in to the Mossi Warrior Clan, and like the show, share the show, tell a friend, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. Also purchase the Conch Community First Pan-African Journal. Let's deal with it from that perspective. We really would appreciate it. I don't have any other books that can substantiate anything that was going on in that first paragraph. I have some other books right here. I don't have nobody talking about that. I brought out the same 4 books as I did earlier. I don't want to elaborate on it, but this book would be a journey for me. It probably would take me months in order to get through with this particular book. It may only take me a month. It may take me 2 weeks to actually read this book, maybe less. It's 400 pages. If I really wanted to read the book, I probably can read the book in about a week. But then it would take me a few more weeks to research a lot of the things that's in the book that I may want to bring out and present on. But again, that's a project in itself. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, man. Y'all have a good evening. It's been a long day. People have been going since early this morning. There's been a few shows. I had to do this one for the catalog. So I just want to say Shimon Hotep, depart in peace. Look forward to seeing you guys next week, possibly. I don't know. Depends on how things go. Have a good time with your family and make sure that everything is good to go. I got some cleaning up to do. And that's it, man. Black African Power, man. Don't forget the debate in New York on the 15th of December. There's a GoFundMe link that is circling around Facebook and certain shows for the Amara Squad. If you support scientific research and methodology in the Amara Squad, get behind them, man, and push the people that you actually adhere to the forefront, and allow them to be the voice of the community to change some of the information, some of the misinformation that's going around. And y'all, man, I just want to say Shimon Hotep, a part of peace again. Thank everybody for tuning in, man. Hold on, let me check the chat real quick before I just really log out. A land trade route in North Africa is slower than traveling the Mediterranean Sea. I agree, but what about if someone is having a war in the Mediterranean and you're just trying to travel to get through to West Africa? You see what I'm saying? So are they supposed to pause the war for you to get through? At that point, you're an innocent bystander. Are you free to travel the Mediterranean unknowing that there's a war. Because you don't know. There's no cell phones like, yo, we beefing with the, you know what I'm saying? Carter is beefing with Spain. You don't know that, you know? You hear it, and then you're going to turn around, or you're going to try to go by land. What about the pirates? How do you avoid the piracy at this time? In an era where gold is, where all gold, salt, you know, all these things were being at natural resources were being traded at high demands. And for those who did not have it, was selling some type of hereafter or whatever. But you know what? Those are things. Um, did the Phoenicians circumnavigate Africa 600 BC? Mr. Clean asked that question. Man, I really don't study the Phoenicians. I really don't. I don't get into that. There's a ancient EU article that says, according to Herodotus, the Phoenicians managed to circumnavigate Africa in a voyage in 600 BC. I don't have the archaeology to vet that, but it looks like, based on ancient EU, an article that was written in 2016 of the 28th of April. They call them the masterminds of mariners. This guy's name is Mark Cartwright. Wrote the article, and here I'll give it to you in the chat, and you can kind of read this for yourself. I'm with you, Sosa, but I'm gonna give you this article, and then you can kind of go through this article based on using research. It says if a Phoenician used a small ship, I doubt it. Read the article, yo. Read the article. That's a starting place, and then that's a good research question for you, though. Did the Phoenicians circumnavigate Africa 600 BCE? So now what you would have to do is you would have to collect enough data and do literature review on that. And then you would have to go searching for primary evidence to substantiate that claim. And when you can bring it out, put it into a form where we actually can learn from it. There's a JSTOR argument that says the alleged Phoenician circumnavigation of Africa. So Herodotus would then, because he would be the source of this claim, would be the one that is liable for providing the primary evidence. So now Herodotus would have to provide primary evidence of this claim. See what I'm saying? So at that point, Herodotus, since he made the claim, his work would have to prove that claim. So we would need to review Herodotus's claim and break that down. Now, this says there's a person named Necho II of Egypt, was the king of the 26th dynasty, which ruled out of Saet. Let me get into this real quick, and let me see if this will help you. There's I think I'll kind of help you in a minute. Necho II. 26th dynasty ruled in Saet. Necho undertook a number of construction projects across the kingdom. In his reign, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, Necho II set out an expedition of the Phoenicians, which in 3 years sailed the Red Sea around Africa to the mouth of the Nile. Upon succession, may remove Necho's name from my image. Necho played a significant role in the histories of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Neo-Babylon Empire, the Kingdom of Judah. Necho II is most likely the pharaoh mentioned in several books of the Bible. The aim of the second Necho's campaign was Asiatic conquest. to contain the westward advance of the Neo-Babylonian power and cut off its trade route across the Euphrates. However, the Egyptians were defeated by an unexpected attack on the Babylonians and were eventually expelled from Syria. Egyptologist Donald R. Redford observed that although Nietzsche II was a man of action from the start and endowed with an imagination perhaps beyond that of the contemporaries, Nietzsche had a misfortune to foster this impression of being a failure. Talks about Nietzsche's military campaigns. It's a lot of Bible references here around this guy. In the 600 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar II come up. I don't like to say that name too many times. The wrong person to pop up in the chat trying to talk religion. But I think Nietzsche would be somebody to look into. A group of sailors is said to begin an attempt to recreate what their captain believes to have been the first circumnavigation of Africa. There's an article by the BBC. There's also a PDF by Academic EDU on the circumnavigation by Africans, the Carthaginians. There's another article related to Nietzsche. So, what's your brother's name? Mr. Clean Out. Never seen you before, brother. Hope you subscribe to the channel. Here goes some more that will help deal with that. So these are some things that will help. How do I learn a language? So you would have to deal with that and continue to collect as much data as possible. So when you come to an honest conclusion, you actually can answer that research question and based on the evidence that you've actually collected. So Nietzsche II would be imperative to your studies, and we'll move on. I'm not really interested in Nietzsche. I'm not really interested in circumnavigation. And I don't know about a small boat circumnavigating the Atlantic right off the coast when even in the 14th and 15th century, people that were traveling around the coast of West Africa, boats were getting lost in the Atlantic. We have evidence of that based on a lot of the slave ship conversations and things of that nature. So I don't know, because people they could come into West Africa, but they couldn't come back. They couldn't go back north. They didn't have the technology to go back north because of the cross current winds, which is essential. But I don't know how the activities were in 600 BC to answer that, brother. The next question here is, my sister and mother got the DNA results back saying we go back to Togo and Cameroon. What do the practice in their culture? And how do I learn that language? Great questions, Pure Black. First, I would start with, I think I could be wrong. This is from the Dome, but Togo, I think they do a lot of voodoo in the Togo area. As far as the language, you may want to, you can kind of Google some of that stuff, and you can look for literature there. I don't know anyone that's from Togo, so I couldn't refer you to someone that's trustworthy. So you need to be very scientific in your approach when trying to understand what the language. That would be the very first thing would be learning the language, so that you would be able to decipher a lot of the communication barriers that would be there, and then to exceed or to go beyond that. As far as Cameroon, depending on what part of Cameroon, because Cameroon, you got the cross river valleys and things of that nature, the Cameroon, Cameroon, Nigerian thing. You got that going on, and you got the Poro and the Soro societies, dealing with that. We actually have information on our channel regarding the Poro, So, those secret societies and the cultural perspectives on that. Yeah, you can go back on our channel in the archive and look for some information that Brother Kofi and myself, and I think even Brother Ben elaborated on. Um, yeah, but you would need someone that actually knows the language to be able to answer that. I don't know the language. There's some things that I actually can get with. Are you welcome, Pure Black? So if there's no other questions, though, I do want to go ahead and end it. I'm gonna look up a little bit. I see a few jokes. Somebody referring me to somebody in the Looney Joe. That's crazy. Snowball says, "Is it heavily footnoted or something?" Oh, Snowball, no. If you're still watching, brother, this book is not footnoted. I can give it to you. I can go through and flick the pages of the book. The book is not heavily footnoted at all. It's no bibliography of footnotes. Nah. Uh, Let me see. Oh yeah, shout out to NBK. Keep supporting the New Black Knowledge channel. Um, right now it's down, but I think that we got a few weeks left for some YouTube violations before we get that channel back. Uh, I think Brother Seneb is going to upload something that he's been working on. So hopefully that comes to fruition soon. So look out for that. Support Brother Seneb, Brother Danny, and the other brothers on the channel. They actually put in some work and things of that nature. Keep supporting, and we got to push true scholarship to the forefront. And then we need to uphold that scholarship and ask more of those teachers related to the said subjects and force them to publish works as well. Put the pressure on all of us to actually publish work, because we could die with this information. A lot of people can die with that information, and then we left for nothing. We're incomplete. I'm gonna give you this right here. There's a PDF. Talks about 600 BCE. You can kind of review this from that academic EU article. See if that'll post for you. Probably won't. But if you Google it, man, you can get it. So yeah, it ain't gonna publish. So. Again, man, I'm gonna go on and get out of here, man. Shimon Hotep, y'all have a good one again. Everybody, have a good evening. It's your boy,